Good morning, friends. It's been a really productive morning. I had a good night's sleep last night, and I've gotten up. I got up a little bit before 5, and it's 6:10. I've got the tent put away. I've got my breakfast cooked, and just letting it cool down now. I've got coffee brewed. All I have left is to clean up breakfast, put away my cook kit, take down the tarp, pack it up, and then load up the canoe, and then I'm ready to go. Well, that was a little more intense than I like it to be. It doesn't take much wind coming from the south to kick up trout. Now, those waves were manageable, but they were the kind of waves that I needed to keep my paddle in the water, if you know what I mean. I'm glad I did it now, though. I saw the wind picking up, and you can now start to hear it in the trees. And looking around, there's a lot of humidity in the air. And this kind of humidity with this kind of heat tells me that we could be possibly in for some thunderstorms, certainly probably by this afternoon, maybe even this morning, who knows. I mean, it's turbulent, in which case I'm probably going to wait to put the sunscreen on until I get into the channel between big trout and little trout, because I know that as I come around this point here, what's going to happen is that it's being bombarded now by those southerly waves. It's hitting the rocks, it's a wall there, and it's creating a lot of chop. And so unless I want to go way out into the lake to catch the consistent waves, I'm going to be dealing with chop there. So time is of the essence. I just wanted to check in with you and kind of let you know what happened there. Pretty intense, you know. Okay, that was tough. The wind had picked up a little bit. The waves got a little bit bigger. They were big enough to be concerned about, for sure. I got to look at the map and find out exactly where I am and route my course to little trout, because this is not great. This given another hour or two, it's going to be the kind of situation where, in addition to fighting big waves, you're also going to be fighting wind that wants to push boats around, little canoes like that. So I don't see this wind slowing down. If wind picking up this much this early in the morning, it should still be like just glassy calm at 7:46. Suggests to me we got a windy day ahead. If I can just get to that portage trail before the wind really kicks up and makes little trout unnavigable, I don't think it could happen. It could happen. That's a nice-sized lake too. Then on the Little Sioux, I won't have to worry about waves. But time is of the essence, so I'm not even going to put on sunscreen yet. I'm just going to look at the map, route my course, and get out there and go to it. Well, that was exciting. I almost took the wrong way. You can see there. Then luckily I pulled out, things didn't look right, so I pulled out my compass, realized I was hitting southeast instead of northeast. I found the right channel, went by the campsite I went by yesterday. I understand why it is that some of these campsites that don't look attractive to me are attractive to these motorboat people, because they've got good places to pull a motorboat up. I imagine that's a governing concern if you're motorboating. Anyway, pretty cool back there though. I saw a golden eagle and a seagull battling over some meat of some kind, and that golden eagle flew right in front of me. I mean, it was like 10 yards in front of the canoe, about maybe 10 yards, 15 yards up. It was really close. I saw the meat hanging from its mouth. I saw the meat hanging from the seagull, or it's not the seagull, the gull's mouth. And the gull just dropped the meat and took off. It's like, okay, that's cool. You can have the meat, buddy. I'm not gonna get into a fight with you. And so, but yeah, there's a lot of eagles. I saw 2 bald eagles skimming the water, maybe about like 3 feet off the water, just cruising over on the other side. When I was coming through that last channel, I saw them on the other side. I saw one come down, then I saw another one come down right after it. Looked pretty cool. Then the golden eagle right in front of me. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's just great. Already having a great day. Excitement, adventure, navigating, getting it all done. So yeah, good day so far. Let's hope that it stays that way, and we'll just keep moving forward. We got to get to the Little Indian Sioux here. We got to get out of these big lakes when there's the potential for wind and waves. Well, looks like I was outside of the wilderness area for a bit, because I see a sign indicating that I am re-entering the wilderness. Hope that's not going to be a problem for my permit. But I saw that ranger and I told him this route, and he didn't seem to think it was a problem. So that does answer a question that I've had that I've never really gotten an official answer to, and he didn't directly address it, and that is, if you're on a trip and your route takes you just outside the wilderness boundary and then back in again, do you have to get a new permit? I think that technically if you leave the wilderness, you're supposed to get a new permit to re-enter. But there's a lot of routes you take in the boundary waters where you might just poke right outside the boundary of the wilderness area and then find yourself having to re-enter it. Anyway, I'm on the passageway from Big Trout to Little Trout, and boy, it could not be more different than it is out on that big lake. Nice, calm water. I think white-throated sparrows singing in the background. Very peaceful compared to those crashing waves out there and that howling wind. So that wind will still be on Little Trout though. It's going to push me to the North Shore. But I thought this would be a good opportunity while I'm paddling and I'm in this channel and it's relatively quiet to talk a little bit about how it is that I handle portage trails, because the situation with a portage trail is that you need to make noise so you don't scare wildlife. And just about every technique I've ever heard of for making noise, like bells, etc., has its disadvantages. The very best way to alert wildlife of your presence is the human voice. So what do? If you're with people, you can have a conversation. That works okay if you have enough to talk about. You can externalize your internal conversation, and that works okay if you have enough to think about. But I generally portage a lot, so because the boundary waters requires it. And I can only talk about myself for so long, and eventually I have to go ahead and I have to come up with something else. And so what I do, the way that I handle the situation, is I memorize stuff. I memorize a little bit of poetry, I memorize movie lines, I memorize maybe speeches. And for this particular trip, hold on for just a moment here, I'm coming up to where it chokes. I hope that it still goes through. Anyway, give me a moment. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to continue to move while I'm talking. Looks as though this, I hope this doesn't choke up. And I'm not going around. Not today, not the wind. I'm gonna find a way through here if I have to. I'll John Ontario it, I'll do it. Hold on a second, I'm gonna have to come back to you. Well, thankfully that was open. Tight though. Another month without rain, that's going to be closed off. That's going to force a pretty ugly portage or a pretty ugly lining situation. Dragging the canoe through mud and such. Anyway, I'm really glad that I made it. That would have been an unexpected obstacle, just like that big beaver pond yesterday. Anyway, I memorize poetry, or I memorize other things. But this trip I've been memorizing poetry. And the poem that I memorized was Robert Frost's poem about two roads diverging in the woods. Came up recently. A lot of people quote the last lines of it, you know, that two roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And they assume that the poem is about individuality, but you know, as somebody pointed out to me, the poem is actually a lot more than that. And so I was curious, so I went and I looked it up, and I went ahead and I brought that out with me to memorize it. And it gives me, you know, while I'm on the portage trail, when I'm memorizing poetry or movie lines or a speech or something like that, it gives me something to think about, which helps distract me and pass the time. It allows me to rehearse it vocally, which then alerts any animals to my presence. And it just gives me a lot to think about while I'm on these trips, you know, where you're inevitably going to be thinking about stuff anyway. So I did memorize the entire poem, and I think I'm ready to deliver it. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not take both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and perhaps having the better claim, because it was grassy and wanting wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I left the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads unto way, I doubted if I should ever be back. I shall be telling this story with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So now I have that poem committed to memory. You know, the advantage of memorizing a poem is that you really get to think deeply about all the words and what they might mean. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I also watched some YouTube videos about the poem and about Robert Frost and what he meant when he wrote it. And I'll talk a little bit about that also. But for right now, it looks as though I'm coming into the big part of Little Trout. I've got some navigating to do. I want to make sure that I take the shortest possible route to that portage trail. It's 8:13. I didn't really think I was going to get on the water until 8, so I'm ahead of schedule. But I had planned to get to the portage by 9, so I might still only be at the portage at 9 and then be back on my schedule again. Which is too bad, because you'd think that I would have, hopefully, since I got on the water 40 minutes earlier, you'd think I would have gotten to the portage 40 minutes earlier. But anyway, that's all for now. I'll check in with you in a bit. So I am nearing the northern side of Little Trout, which means that I'm getting closer to the portage trail. So now I'm starting to skirt the shore a little bit more, so that when that portage trail comes about, I will be able to catch it. I shouldn't miss it. I mean, there's really nothing else on this shore, so, and it's a pretty flat shore. It's just at the end, just before the lake shore kind of turns to the west. Right at that little crease, that's where the portage trail should be. So I thought that I would get back on here, talk a little bit more about Robert Frost's poem. He was surprised by the success of that poem, because he did not intend it to be a statement on individuality. He actually had written the poem about a hiking friend of his who had a really terrible time making up his mind. And so they would go hiking, and he would often wimble. That is, he would often sit at a path and not really be able to decide which way to go. And so he was just a generally very indecisive person, I think, even beyond just his hiking situation. And so Frost wrote the poem for the guy, and that was the whole point of the poem, was to write that just as a kind of ode to a friend who was indecisive. I'm still looking for the portage trail here, so forgive me if I'm a bit distracted. And, you know, of course, we're not, whoa, look at that. very sandy bottom and very shallow here. Okay, I'm gonna have to go out offshore just a little bit more. Now, this is important, right? Because, I mean, Robert Frost would say, this poem is not about individuality. It's not. I don't know if he talks like that. I don't know what he sounds like. There are recordings of him, though. You can find recordings of Frost. I think you can find recordings of Frost reading this poem. But that was not his intention. That doesn't mean we're tied to what his intention is. I mean, that's the great revolution of semiotics, is that, you know, Roland Barthes and all those guys, a poem is what it means to me. It's what it means to you. It's just a set of signs that reflect the reader as much as the author. And so if that's the case, then any commentary that I provide on the poem, I'm providing commentary from my perspective. I'm taking my horizon of understanding and I am connecting it to the horizon of understanding that's captured in the poem provided by Robert Frost. Now with that, oh look at that, some geese go. Nice. This is what I like, man. Everywhere you turn, there's just beautiful stuff. I hope I haven't missed the portage trail. But let me just say, I just want to get this point out before I hit the portage trail, and that is, anything I say about this poem is not going to be what Robert Frost intended. It's going to be about my particular perspective on that poem. So, with that, I'm now going to comment on what looks to be, I'm going to have to walk through some muskeg in order to get to this portage trail. Looks like it's going to be some low ground. I'm sure the portage trail will be intact, maybe a little muddy, but it's grass. And you know what grass means? Grass means ticks, means lots and lots of ticks. So it looks like I'm going to pick up some more ticks. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to take off all my clothes before I get into the car, shake them all out, put them in a bag, put them in the trunk, and not put them in the cab so that I don't bring these ticks home. I have not been free of ticks since well, certainly since the second day. I don't really remember any on the first day, but that first day was a blur. All right, well that's it, and I will talk to you again, I'm sure, at the Little Indian Sioux River. Well, look at us. We are back on the Little Indian Sioux, but we did the portage trail a lot faster than was expected. The portage trail, it had some pretty substantial muddy spots. Some that went kind of on for quite a long time. Nothing too serious, honestly. Nothing that could grab a boot or suck you down or anything like that. It kind of starts out over on the trout side. It actually, the ground gets higher a lot faster than I thought it would. I thought it would kind of be, well, I thought you'd be going through some swamp for quite a long time. But it undulates a little bit, and then occasionally it'll drop down into a kind of alder watershed, where there's just there's a seep of water coming through with a lot of alders. But at the same time, it's really nice because I saw some marsh marigolds. And as much as you can see a field of marsh marigolds, I saw a field of marsh marigolds within a big stand of alders. So that was cool. There's some spruce forest there, some mature spruce forest. There's a point at which a spruce tree has fallen down just recently. You really get a sense for how big those trees are when you have an opportunity to basically walk the entire length of the tree. I mean, it's a good 30 or 40 paces. And it was pretty incredible. That's a big, powerful organism coming down. I would not want one of those to land on me, that's for sure. A lot of moose droppings on the trail. Some very fresh moose droppings on the trail, it looked like, from my perspective. Man, there's a lot of moose. When moose must drop an enormous amount of poop at a given time, unless they're returning to the same spot over and over again, because the piles are just huge. But I guess that's, that just makes sense. They're very large animals. And what else did we see on there that was kind of cool? What else did we see? Oh, I ran across this strange fungi or mushroom or something that kind of looks like a brain or something. Really interesting, and I saw a bunch of them. Oftentimes they were right in the middle of the dry trails, growing right amongst the leaves. There were some mature red pines that looked pretty cool. I don't know if they were old growth or not, but they were just mature red pines. So a lot of variety. I mean, there were some parts of the trail that were very boulevard-like, you know, very nice, very high, very dry, not a lot of roots, not a lot of rocks, just very nice. But then the end, just before you get to the Little Indian Sioux, of course, as you would expect, what it does is it drops down into just alder bog. So you got alders, you know, choking in on either side of the trail. You've got mud, of course, because you're walking on hussocks of dirt that's all muddy. And actually a lot less mud than I would have thought, but there is some mud. And then you finally come out to the Little Indian Sioux here. And I'm sitting in the Little Indian Sioux right now, and what I was told is that the trail is marked with a stick. And from the perspective of the river, that stick does not look much different than the rest of what you see around here. It all kind of blends in. I'd say a better way to maybe mark it is that there's the stick, a little takeout, and there's a seep coming in right where the portage trail is. So there's some water seeping in. Of course, that's going to change over time as it gets drier. But boy, it's hard to see that portage trail until you're right up on it, almost looking backwards. So it wasn't that bad of a portage, and now we're on the Little Indian Sioux. We're way ahead of schedule at 10:30. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to get to the car. It's just impossible to tell because this river just snakes and turns. But the good news is that I've got a decent breeze, and it's definitely a breeze that is going to be a tailwind. And the current is I'm already feeling the benefit of the current. I had to fight this current almost the entire way up, and now I get a benefit from it all the way back to the car. But I know that there's going to be some beaver dams, and I'm looking at one right now. But it's well broken into, so no trouble there. All right, well, I'm going to hit it. I will come back to you later. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that Robert Frost poem. Things to report. One is that paddling down the Little Indian Sioux is a lot easier than paddling up the Little Indian Sioux. Another one is that, I've said it before, I'll say it again, finding that portage trail would be devilishly hard. Even having already seen it, I would have been misled by several other takeouts or things that look like takeouts. The problem is that the moose and the beaver, they all wear trails that come into the river. And so you see trails over and over and over again that look like they could be the portage trail in the approximate vicinity of where the portage trail ought to be. And so I would just hate to have to try to find that portage trail from the river. It's got to be one of the most devilishly difficult things possible to accomplish. The next thing to report is that there in fact are a couple of spots on this river. I'd call them poach sites. The forest ranger, he let me know that there are a couple of spots here that you might be able to camp if you absolutely had to. You know, he wasn't endorsing illegal camping, but he was saying that there were a couple of spots here that would make good candidates for camping. And I think people use them as such because I would guess it wouldn't be too hard to find yourself on this river looking for that portage and not being able to find it. And then what are you going to do? Well, you're just going to have to camp at some point. You know, I mean, either that or travel in the dark. I'm sure lots of people, they toss in the towel, they raise the white flag, and they just do an illegal camp, a poach. I honestly haven't done a poach in the Boundary Waters since my very first season ever coming here. And that's only because I just had no idea that that rule was as hard and fast as it was. The very first 3 nights I ever camped in the Boundary Waters, I poached. And I did it in just flagrant violation of the rules in front of everybody. There was one campsite that I took that was right in front of another campsite. It was just an island, nice island. It was like a perfect campsite. It's like, of course you take that campsite. And we were right off another campsite. We could just look directly from where we were setting up our tent right over into somebody else's campsite. we just didn't know. I had come from a National Park Service camping tradition, mostly on the East Coast, places like Shenandoah. And, you know, you just camped anywhere there was a good spot. What governed where you camped was how well the characteristics of the place were. And there are lots of great places to camp here. But of course, you can only camp, according to the regulations, at the fire grates and the pit toilets. You know, people come in, when they first start going to the boundary waters, they may not know all the rules, but they could become lifelong visitors. That's certainly in my case, that's true. I figured it out. After the third night, we figured out where you're supposed to camp. I don't know if somebody told us or what, but we figured it out. And then we were in for 5 nights. 3 nights we illegally camped, 2 nights we camped. Not even out of necessity, we just camped where we wanted to camp. I wanted to talk a little bit about Frost's poem. I've been memorizing that poem on these portage trails and thinking a lot about it, and I thought I'd share some of my ideas. Keeping in mind, of course, that these are my interpretations. It starts off with 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood. The fact that they are yellow leaves means that it's autumn, which could suggest that it's in the autumn of a person's life. That is the point at which they realize that although they're still vital and reasonably young, the end is coming. The end is nigh, because winter is coming. And so it could be a metaphor for the seasons of life. And certainly, you know, the point at which you get into your middle age, the point at which you start to see the color developing on your leaves, if you will, you start to think about, well, what do you want to do? What's left in your life? You know, you only have a certain amount of time left. You got to make a decision. When you're young, it just feels like everything's possible. You just do anything, whatever, waste time, because it feels as though you have so much of it. But as you get older, life, mortality, it's pressing on you. It says you need to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. Then, you know, truly, you know, 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood. And sorry I could not take both suggests that there are at least 2 options that are equally good, and lone traveler B, and so they all die alone. But ultimately, you know, all the decisions that we make in life, we make those decisions alone. It may affect other people, it may have powerful effects on other people, and therefore have powerful effects on us, but we make those decisions alone. So what does the person do? They look down one as far as they could till it bends in the undergrowth. And so they're projecting out into the future, imagining the future implications of one path, of one road, of one decision. This suggests that the kind of person that's making the decision is somebody who plans out their life. And then, all of a sudden, they find that there's another road. Then took the other as just as fair. And so if it's just as fair, it could be just as just. It could be the path that's most consistent with a larger world view. If it's just as fair, as in terms of beauty, it could be what is ever subjectively good, subjectively wonderful. You know, they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. To some degree, that's true. And so it could be a response to that, to search for something beautiful or to search for something just. I mean, in that way, Frost has spoken to either type of person, a person seeking justice in the world, is seeking to do right, or a person who is seeking beauty and pleasure, or maybe great art or something like that. Maybe to touch the essential forms. I don't know what it is. Could be that. So then took the other as just as fair, and perhaps having the better claim, he's evaluating the 2 according to some criteria. And the criteria is because it was grassy and wanting wear. As though somebody had not done it in a long time, or had never done it. But then he says, as for that, the passing there, both were worn really about the same. I'm suggesting that there's nothing particularly novel about his approach in the end. But I think that the language that's used is really interesting. You know, the idea that he says, because, suggests that somebody is truly reasoning through this decision, that they're not just acting purely on impulse. Even if the particular reasons don't seem that concrete to us, because it was grassy and wanting wear, suggests like some level of need, that the person making the decision would choose that road because the choice is one that would meet the need of something on that road. And so, but then, you know, then Frost says that both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. And then all of a sudden, after looking at the two choices, telling us almost nothing about the other one, he says, "Oh, I left the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads unto way, I doubted if I should ever be back," he says. Well, that tells me he really has made his choice, and he knows from experience that in choices of this size, of this consequence, that once you make that decision, you're probably not going back. Certainly not going back to the previous option. This suggests that both roads are a big enough project that you can accomplish both. It also suggests the idea of a finite amount of time, because if the poet is a vampire who lives forever, or just immortal, it doesn't have to be a vampire, but if the poet is living forever, then it doesn't matter. They can do both. They can go down both roads. They can go down one road, come back, go down the other road, then find another road, go down that road, and just road all the way along. And so that does emphasize the interpretation, or underscore the interpretation, of mortality, and the fact that there is a limited amount of time to make it happen. So then, the person knows that they've made a choice, and they project themselves into the future. I shall tell this with a sigh. Somewhere, ages and ages hence, imagining what life will be like when they look back at the choice that they've made. And they expect that on some level they may even be telling the story of the road not taken with some level of regret. And then there are the famous lines that are used by everybody. Two roads diverged in a wood. I chose the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Well, yeah, it's made all the difference, of course. It's a consequential decision that's been made. It sure sounds like when you just take those three lines that it's about somebody who's making an unconventional choice, a choice that others wouldn't normally take, the road less taken. But I mean, as he points out, like, both roads have not been taken in a long time. He notices the one having perhaps the better claim. And that suggests to me a person at midlife making a consequential decision. There's just a lot going on in that poem. You know, he claims that he wrote it for a friend who has a hard time making up their mind. Kind of a Wimbley person, I think. But it also might have just been in praise of the way in which the person carefully deliberates upon any choices that they make. Considers the consequences long into the future. There's much to learn. There's much to learn from the poem that is not just about people acting unconventionally or doing the different thing, going against the crowd. But I think the larger point here is that that's what you can do on the portage trails, man. Is you gotta make noise. Right now I'm making noise when I probably don't want to, because I would like to see some wildlife. But you gotta make noise to make sure that the animals know you're there. The bear in particular. You don't want to accidentally walk between a bear, a sow, and her cub. It's one of the few situations in which a black bear will attack almost reflexively against a human. Otherwise, black bear are gonna approach you very slowly, very deliberately. But moose, man, whew, moose are totally unpredictable, man. I don't ever want to come up against a moose. I like seeing a moose, I do. But I get a little bit, when I'm in a canoe, or I'm in the wilderness and I see a moose within distance, I always worry a little bit about that, you know, because they're unpredictable animals. And if you run into a bull moose doing rut, they might come at you. And if you don't have an easy way out, you could be in trouble. But on the portage trail, you gotta make noise. How do you make noise? Talking is the best way. And if you're alone, you gotta find something to talk about. I memorize lines. I memorize speeches, I memorize poems, I memorize movie lines. On this trip, I memorized Robert Frost. It was fun. Kept me occupied. Gave me something to think about. Gave me a deeper understanding of the poem. Anyway, that's all for now. I'm at the bottom of the rapids of the first portage now. It's amazing how much this river can change so quickly. You know, it went from being in that open bog swamp to starting to slowly narrow up. It's a nice portage trail for the most part. It's pretty unremarkable. It's got a really nice drop at the end that is no trouble to walk up and down, but just gives you a great view of the portage from above and a giant rock. It's got some big rocks along the way, but nothing that you can't negotiate easily. Help with the takeout is pretty nice. It's got a deep water takeout. You just set your boat right up next to a big rock and drop your stuff in, and then step right in as though you're stepping onto the Queen Mary. So it's a nice portage. And like I say, this part of the Little Indian Sioux, because it straightens out and it still has current, it moves a lot faster than that part that's part of the upper Little Indian Sioux. This lower Little Indian Sioux has a lot more just like straight shots. I'm about ready to hit another one of those straight shots now, but it's pretty clear. My expectation or my prediction that the weather would turn, I think that is gonna bear out. So I kind of have to make good time, but I'm very concerned about the weather. I'm looking around and I'm seeing some of these clouds are getting pretty dark and pretty menacing. And occasionally, every once in a while, I'll get like a breeze of really cool air, which suggests to me that there's some stuff up there that wants to come down. and I don't want to be around when that happens. So ideally I'd get to my car before this thing starts storming. It's gonna be storms, gonna be lightning strikes, and but it's gonna be, like I said, localized small stuff. So like I said, I'll check in with you again at the Little Pony River. I'm doing exactly the opposite of what I did on the way up here. On the way up the river, I looked for the slack water, and I went to that. Here, I find myself looking for the current and hitting that. I could be getting close to the junction now of the Little Pony and the Little Indian Sioux. Anyway, it's gorgeous out here. Truly feels like a remote, wild experience. Right here in the good old Boundary Waters, US of A. Good times. There's the sprinkling again. I can only hope that moves off to the east. It doesn't hit me here. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, I just wanted to check in really quickly to let you know that the weather is doing as you would predict. When it's hot and it's humid and you're in the Boundary Waters and it's May 22nd. Yeah, May 22nd. Why not? Why not May 22nd? I was prepared for a little moisture, but I was hoping for some cooler temperatures. It's probably still, even with these sprinkles, it's still probably in the upper 70s, lower 80s. It's hot, hot, hot. All right, that's it. It looks as though I missed the junction of the Little Indian Sioux and the Pony River, and I am already at the penultimate, that is the second to last portage that I have to take before I get back to the entry point. So it's a relatively long portage. I was really happy to find it. I was pleasantly surprised. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna portage that now because I need to get back to the car before this weather actually hits. Portage trail here. Two roads merged into yellow wood. Because it was grassy and wanting not in black. Okay, we've completed that portage. That's the second to last portage. Before we get to the car, we just have to portage around Sioux Falls. It's 2:47. Looks like we'll probably get to the car by, I would guess, 4, maybe be on the road by 4:30 or 5. I gotta tell you, even though 2:47 is late in the day, I sure feel better knowing that we are on our way. Oh, I can hear Sioux Falls now. This is great. Okay, good, good, good. I'm making really good progress. I might even make it to the car by 3:30. I'll catch up with you after these falls. Well, Mission Wilderness friends, it looks as though our trip has finally come to a conclusion. It's just been a really fantastic trip. It started off with a lot of adventure, high adventure really, with the BWCA fire. I've calculated we've done more than, I think, 1,200, 1,300 rod of portage on this trip. That's a lot. I don't know how many miles that is, but that's a lot of portaging. It feels like a whole lifetime has occurred in these last 4 or 5 days. And alas, I'm in the final stretch to the car. But for now, I should keep moving on, because although the weather seems to have calmed a bit, things have slowed down, just a little bit of light rain here and there. And so I've been lucky in that respect, and I think I should make it back to the car unscathed. I only have about maybe a quarter of a mile left. Thanks again.